I'm going to use this to make a yukata. It's cotton, so I'm making a yukata, not a kimono. And it's from Singapore, where this style of fabric treatment is extremely popular. It's in the style of a batik. So batik, Batik, is a style of surface decoration used in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia, where you use a resist. So in this case, it's often paraffin. It can be beeswax, but they use a wax resist to create the patterns, and then you paint within them to create the colors. Now, this isn't a batik. This isn't. This is a print, so it's a facsimile of a batik. Um, as you can see by the other side, it's a sublimated print. Oh, you can't really see that. Oh, can you see that? It's just a little bit lighter on this side. So it's been printed on top of the fabric. It's a similar technique though. The batik technique is similar to, say, a West African wax print, where you use a resist paste, a yuzen zome, a yuzen dyeing process in Japan, or maybe the kalamkari process in India. Just so you understand what I'm talking about with the batik, they are fantastic. If you have flown with Singapore Airlines, their staff wear a batik inspired print. And in fact, in the store where I bought this, right next to it was the actual Singapore Airlines batik. But I didn't buy that because it was the wrong width. And this one isn't. It's 110 centimeters wide, the fabric. There you go, you can see it all there. Which is 43 inches. So if you have done the course is linked below. Come and do the course with me. We do this fabric. We make a yukata out of this exact size fabric. And I have 4.5 meters of the fabric to make a yukata like this. This is a kimono because it's made of silk. Or like this. This is a yukata that I made out of linen. And then I've painted it myself. So I'm going to use the pattern that I created that comes free with the course, which you can join right now. Join today. It's just below in the description. Come along and make your own kimono or yukata with me. Let's carry on and make this one. So I pressed my fabric, I folded it in half, I made a little clip. And this is how you cut the pattern for your yukata. I've got 2 strips now. I've already pre-clipped, and I would take off 1/3 of the half. So there's the half. I've measured in for 1/3, and oh, that is so much fun. I'm just I'm just sad that I've only got one more to go. So where is it? It's at the other end. This is the other half of the fabric, and I've got a clip there, so that's 1/3 of this whole piece. Amazing. So these long strips that are only 1/3 of the width of the half, they make up these bits. So this is your okumi, or the front overlap, and it's what overlaps at the front, hence its name, down here, and there's 2 of them. It also makes up the collars, which there are 2. There's an over collar that goes here, and an under collar that's running under that and comes all the way down out to the front here. And this will also make a sash for the yukata. So you'll have a garment like this, and it'll have the collars, and it'll have a matching sash that goes around it. Then we go through to measuring. Cut up the narrows pieces into the 2 front overlaps and the 2 collar pieces, and we take off the sleeves off the wide pieces. So this is cotton shirting, quite close to a lawn. It's so easy to tear, and as you can see, it comes apart very easily. You may have seen me tear up another length of fabric to make a kimono. That took me 10 minutes because it was 140 centimeters wide or 55 inches. This is the narrow width fabric. So when you do the course, you see that there's two types of fabric that we often deal with. One's wide, like I said before, one's narrow, which is this one, 110 centimeters, 43 inches. You're gonna do it this way. The way that I did it is to cut it straight down the middle, and you have the narrow pieces, the half width pieces, run down the center of the fabric, and the longest pieces, so the sleeves and the body, they run along the selvage. These two edges with the selvage on them, if you follow the course, what we do is we turn over those edges. Using this method, you don't have to turn over those edges. You use your selvage. If your selvage isn't unsightly and you can use it within the garment, then go ahead and use it. It just means that you have less preparation to do. It's so much fun, and it makes it so easy to just half the fabric and then take a third off each of those halves, and you just get to tear your heart away. You can see there's a slight pucker along here, and that will just be pressed out, because what we've done is we've torn it apart. It's quite a ferocious act if you consider it. So we're going to press along here. This will all flatten out, and the first thing you do with your sleeves and the body pieces is, once we've pressed it, we fold them over and we find what's known as their mountains. So this, the halfway point, you can see it here pressed in my robe there, straight up there. It's called the Sodayama. This is the sleeve mountain, and then there's the Katayama, which then takes you from where the sleeve joins the body up to behind the neck. These are really important for the entire process, for making the entire garment. You need to know where these are. There isn't much that you need to know. You have to know where those are. It makes it so much easier to make the entire garment, and you'll see why later. But that's the first thing you do. And in order to find them, you are literally folding it directly in half, making sure everything's lovely and neat, and then you press this in, and you're pressing, this is the right side, wrong sides are in here. You're pressing it as if it is going to be worn. So once it's part of the garment, it will sit there, and this will be straight down here. This links up to the body. Very important to know where it is. It makes it crisp. And don't worry, because if you lose it, because we press it in throughout the process of making the garment, you're constantly repressing this point in, and it becomes permanently pressed into it. And then when you store your garments, they store flat and keep this crease in them as well. Absolutely fascinating little part of the garment. There are so many little bits and pieces in a kimono that do this, that have these lovely little stories to them. The shoulder mountain, it is the mountain along the shoulder. It's a peak. That's why it's called that, Sodayama. And Katayama, the one that goes over the shoulders, which we'll do next when we do the body pieces. And just pressing this back into form and prepping the pattern pieces. And if you're not going to carry on with the sewing, you're just cutting the pattern pieces today, do this, get this done, and then when it comes to it, you can start nice and neat and knowing where everything is. Take that Sodayama, the sleeve mountain. Isn't this fabric beautiful? Isn't it just gorgeous? Look at that. Beautiful, and it just reminds me of being in Singapore. There's my two sleeves, and I'm going to wrap them up like so, keeping those folds in place, and put them to the side. I'll put them up there. This is where my ironing board comes in handy. You don't have to have an ironing board like this, but if you're making kimono and yukata, it makes it so. Do you see this here? It's greater than the width of the panel pieces. when you're making a kimono yukata, all the panel pieces are about this width, and this ironing board is just over that. It's also just wider than the actual length of fabric itself. If you're using 110 centimeters or 43 inches, it's just a bit wider, so I can press the whole piece of fabric that way, but also I can press all the pattern pieces this way and move them along like this. So if you love kimono and yukata as much as me, find one of these. I don't know where I got this from, I can't remember. But if you search, you will find it. Like we did with the sleeves, now take it, put it on. This is quite hard to see this because it's a well dyed fabric and it's a fine cotton, so it's quite thin. It's hard to tell just exactly at a quick glance which is the right and the wrong side. You really have to have your wits about you and make sure you do the right thing because you could end up the wrong way out. I've done that before and it's very annoying. So it's attention to detail, and this is an important detail. I'm finding that one's exact center and making not the Sodayama, the Katayama, so the shoulder mountain. And I'm going to imprint that in now so we know where the exact center is. It means that your hems will line up, that your side seams will line up, that your sleeves will be in the right position and the garment won't twist if you have these in there. There isn't a lot of marking, there isn't a lot of pattern minutiae to go through when you have a garment like this. You just need to know where your half points are. Very logical and a dream to make. It is so much fun and you realize just how easy it is once you start doing it. So there's one body piece, I'm going to do the second. And I'll just fold them up nice and neat. Sleeves, bodies, done. So I'm onto the half width pieces. I have the over collar. We talked about the Sodayama earlier, and that's a charming name for part of the construction. This is the Tomo Eri, which means the collar's friend, because it is. It sits above the collar and protects it. And when this is worn or soiled, once you've worn it for a while, you take this off and you put it underneath the collar and you get a second life out of the collar. This is the highest used area of the entire garment. It's up against the back of the neck, so sweat and makeup and all those things, and it's there to be replaced. It's the sort of spare tire, I suppose, but a rather beautiful spare tire, if there ever was one. And that's how these garments last 100 years and can be passed down from generation to generation. They're absolutely fantastic. And once you delve into the history of the kimono and all their little kimonoisms, we talk about Chanelisms in Coco Chanel and the things that she invented in her garments. There's kimonoisms for sure in the kimono that are just as beguiling. So there's the two collars done, and I'm just going to fold that in half. You need to know the center point of the collar, but when it comes to making the collar, that will all happen when we do our collar prep. So I'm just going to set them aside for now while we carry on with the first press. These two pieces are called the okumi, and that is the front overlap. So they're what make the kimono or the yukata, this garment, they're what make this garment overlap the body like a double-breasted jacket. And they're quite something to behold themselves. Often you cover leftover rice. Leftover rice, that's how you remember it. That's why I always say it that way. Leftover right. which means that the right hand side often, it isn't left bare when they decorate them, but they leave it with less on it because it's always going to be covered. If you're wearing it in the traditional manner, that's going to be covered up by the left side. But it's also where you might find brand names, the people who made it or dyed it or put it together. Their brand might be down there in a little medallion. If you imagine a Japanese stamp. So they're quite an interesting part because they're obscured when wearing. They're treated differently, and it's fascinating to see. And I'll just fold these this way. So I'm folding these for the sake of storing them. I'm not pressing anything into that because these are sewn on lengthways. We don't want a big honking pleat in the middle of them. I'm just doing this to store them. And if I stored this cut pattern for a while, I'd press them again when I got them out just to make sure that hadn't created a crease there. So I have 2 front overlaps, 2 collar pieces, 2 body pieces, and 2 sleeves. That's the garment. The entire garment is there. This whole garment that I'm wearing, that you've seen me wearing throughout this whole process, is in these 8 pattern pieces. They're all rectangles and they're sewn straight. It's so easy. It's so much fun to make. Now I have all these beautiful, neat pattern pieces here. It's time to start prep. First thing I always do is I prep the collar. I'm turning the ends. Can you see that? Yeah, you can perfectly. I'm turning the ends under. So this is the wrong side. It's very hard to tell, even for me in the light, but this is the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm turning the ends under by 1 centimeter, about 1/2 inch or something like that in imperials. All the measurements are there in the pattern. Turn that under like that, and then I'm going to find this exact center, which is just by bringing the 2 ends together. You see how easy this is to make. There's just a lot. I always say this about this garment. There's a lot of halves. This is half of that. That's half of this. So many halves. The reason I tear the fabric is not just for the theatrics, although they are just cause by themselves. No one's going to get angry with you for wanting to do that. One of the reasons it's so useful is in this case here. So we're turning raw edges over, and we're turning them by 1/2 centimeter. So I think that's 1/4 inch, and then 1 centimeter, about 1/2 inch. These tiny little turns that we're doing, because we've torn the fabric, you've torn straight down the actual the weft, the warp. The warp goes a long way. So the warp is the length of the fabric, weft to right. The weft goes across the fabric. That's how you remember it. It's a fantastic little device. Because we've cut, well, we're not cutting, we're tearing down the thread that's actually woven into it. It pierces at that line. You basically, when you start pulling it apart, you've chosen 2 threads to separate, and they'll separate if you have the right fabric. They will separate all the way down evenly, and so you're following a line rather than creating one. So if you think of scissors, you're going to create a line. You're cutting wherever you want. You're crossing threads. You're coming back and forth, and cutting's fine, and everyone cuts. It's fine. I cut these all the time. But it just means that when it comes to these parts, when you're folding over, you're going to have it go a little bit like this, because you cut and sometimes it misses, sometimes you cut accidentally on a bit of a curve. This creates a straight line. Historically, making clothes by hand out of cotton and linen, say in the Tudor times, you would draw thread to create a straight line. Drawing thread means picking up one thread out of a textile and literally drawing it out of the textile. So you get it with a pin and you pull out that thread, and that creates a little hole. You wouldn't think that it makes much of a mark, but I've done it, and it makes a very visible line, and it gets dead straight lines. So you think those big puffy shirts from the Middle Ages. This is how you create the straight lines that are then gathered to make them. So you're marking an exact line along. Their scissors weren't as sharp, and they had less time to do stuff, so they needed good ways to do it. And drawing thread was one way. By tearing your fabric, you're not drawing thread, but you're using the textile. And the fact that the textile is made at right angles, there's a warp and a weft crossing over each other, that way and that way, and you're using that to then create your own line in your fabric, means that it is a lovely straight line once you've torn it. As long, I have to keep saying this, as long as you're using a lovely cotton that tears. None of that matters if your fabric won't tear. I've used it on fabric that it didn't work with, and you just go off on a tangent. Literally, you go off on a tangent and you end up with something that doesn't work at all. So you need to make sure it works before you use this method. But when you do, it makes for very straight and very clean lines. Now, I am completely happy. I think that's a gorgeous selvage there. It's got a little bit of a trim to it, and then it's got the selvage running down there, the actual sort of ribbon where it's sewn a bit tighter. You might find that unsightly, and in which case you should remove it and then turn this side as well. I think that's fine, and also I know that that's going to be easier for me. It's less work to do it that way, and it does not look bad enough to warrant the work involved to take it away. So it's personal choice. It's how you feel about the selvage. There's nothing wrong with using selvages. Coco Chanel used them in her suits all the time. Don't let anyone shame you for your selvages. I hope that isn't happening to anyone out there. That would be ghastly. Getting the edges of your collar lined up is so important. I cannot stress this enough. If you get these two edges lined up perfectly along with each other, it's going to make your life so much easier when it comes to garment construction, when you apply the collar. It takes you as much time to put the collar onto the garment as it takes to make the entire garment all together. This is the part that is, I'm not going to say hard, because it's not. It's easy once you know how to do it, but it's all about the preparation. That's what you need to know to do it. You need to get it right now so it's easy to sew later. That's the important part. So get the two edges even. Make sure they meet up. If you lift them up, they should fall right back down on top of each other, because you're going to be sewing through them to secure them. Make sure the very ends of them meet up right down to the corner. That's a part where it can really slip away. You can, because we've done the edges the way we have, we've turned out the collar, we've bagged it out, so you can really get a little curve in the last bit of the seam allowance there. That's where it can slip and come away from the garment. So take your time, press the collar well, and it will pay dividends when it comes to putting the garment together later on. So there is the prep work done. I have a coat loop, which I made, very simple. The two collars are now put together. I have two front overlaps. I have two sleeves and two bodies. I'm now ready to sew the yukata. It is time for garment construction. First thing I do is sew the center back. I line it up at the hem, make sure that's all good. Then I come along and make sure that it lines up at the center back neck. So where that creases that I put in earlier and that I talked so much about, that katayama, the shoulder mountain, where it meets at the center back neck. With basic skills you can make this garment. It really is so simple. I talked about the katayama and how we're constantly pressing that back in, and you just want to find that center point again and again. This is where we'll measure the sleeves, how the sleeves fall, and then it will determine how your side seam is put together. If you lose them, then you'll end up with a wonky garment and it won't be lovely. It's time to pin the okumi in place. These are the front overlaps. So you can see here we have a center back all the way down there. These are not your center fronts, but these are the front of the front pieces. And it's along here we're going to place two front overlaps called okumi. Both sides have been, these have been turned in exactly the same way, so that this is 15 centimeters or 6 inches, around 6 inches, 15 centimeters once finished. So once this is seamed, that's 15 centimeters. Now there are some of you out there who are probably quite nervous at the fact that I've kept this selvage. It might not be quite what you like, but I think it is just gorgeous. Look at this. It's as if it's a little bit fur trimmed. Do you see that? Because of these little flyaways. They're so soft. They're like feathers. But what I love is this. Do you see that? A black outline. And the only person who's going to see this is me when I wear it and put it on. But it's absolutely beautiful. Don't discard your selvages. Just give them one more chance. Because they are and can be quite a great little statement.